The air in Aitan Shalev's office was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the unspoken weight of a decade's worth of obsession, a weight that had finally, tentatively, lifted. He reread the final sentence of the report, the one that had been the focus of so much calculation, of sleepless nights, of a relentless pursuit that had seemed, at times, to defy the very laws of probability. Ahmed Fales Khalil is confirmed to be in custody. Aitan closed his eyes for a moment. The image of Khalil's face, a ghost he'd chased across continents, burned into the back of his eyelids. It was done. The man responsible for the EMEA bombing. The architect of a slaughter that had scarred Buenos Aires and haunted the corridors of Israeli intelligence for years was theirs. The dossier, a thick, leather-bound testament to the unrelenting pursuit, lay open on his desk. It was a physical manifestation of the hunt, a compendium of intercepted communications, grainy surveillance photos, whispered rumors, and the painstaking analysis that had finally brought them to this moment. The cover, worn smooth from countless readings, bore only a single, stark word, *architect. Within its pages. Khalil's life unfolded, a tapestry woven with threads of poverty, violence, and a chillingly calculated ambition. Aitan had spent countless hours immersed in these details, living Khalil's life in reverse, mapping his movements, anticipating his choices, understanding the intricate web of deception he had constructed to disappear. Sunlight, a rare luxury in the windowless office, spilled across the desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room was Spartan, the only adornment a framed map of the Middle East, its borders etched with the history of conflict. Scattered across the desk were photographs, each a piece of the puzzle, a blurry image of Khalil entering a pharmacy in Beirut, a magnified scan of his altered fingerprints, a detailed schematic of the warehouse where he had been apprehended. Each image was a victory, a testament to the meticulous planning, the patience, and the unwavering dedication of the team. Aitan picked up a photograph, a recent one, showing Khalil after plastic surgery. The alteration was subtle, a reshaping of the nose and jawline, yet it was enough to fool facial recognition software, a testament to Khalil's meticulous preparation. He'd lived in the shadows for a decade, reinventing himself, shedding his identity layer by layer, hoping to become nothing more than a ghost. But he'd failed. The system, the relentless machine of intelligence, had finally caught him. He felt the familiar thrum of exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that came with the territory. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his gaze drifting to the window, to the distant skyline of Tel Aviv. He thought of the families in Buenos Aires, of the victims of the EMEA bombing, of the years of pain and unanswered questions. Justice, he knew, was a cold comfort, a hollow victory. But it was a victory nonetheless. He had a meeting in an hour. The decision had been made, the operation executed. Now, the aftermath, the next phase, and the next dossier. The hunt never truly ended. He turned back to the report, his gaze sweeping over the final paragraphs. The details of the capture, the meticulous planning, the precise execution. They had captured him, yes, but at what cost? And what secrets did Khalil hold? What damage had he done? And what other ghosts were out there waiting to be hunted? The weight of the dossier settled back on his shoulders, a reminder of the relentless, unforgiving nature of his work. He was the head of the division, the architect of the hunters, tasked with finding the ghosts that haunt the world. The hunt was never truly over. There were always more dossiers to open, more names to remember, more shadows to chase. The system never rests, and neither could he. The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed, a monotonous counterpoint to the coiled tension in the air. The air itself was thick with the scent of stale coffee and apprehension, a cocktail that had become familiar to Aitan Shalev in the wake of significant operations. This was a room of sharp angles and sharper minds, the concrete heart of Mossad's most sensitive decisions. He could taste the metallic tang of fear, a phantom sensation brought on by the gravity of the meeting. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that one wrong word, one miscalculation, could unravel a decade of relentless pursuit and cost lives. He closed his eyes briefly. The image of Khalil's face, captured in grainy surveillance footage, burned behind his lids. The man was a ghost, a phantom who had haunted them for so long. And now He was real again, and the choices that had to be made were like trying to hold a live wire. The faces around the polished mahogany table were a mosaic of doubt and resolve. Generals from the IDF, their uniforms crisp and starched, sat across from analysts with tired eyes, the architects of intelligence and the enforcers of action. Lawyers, their faces impassive, murmured to themselves, calculating the legal ramifications of any decision. Aitin sat at the head of the table, his own face a carefully constructed mask of authority. The decision before them, kill or capture. The discussion began, predictably, with the arguments for elimination. A clean solution, General Stern declared, his voice a low rumble. Minimize risk to our operatives. Eliminate the potential for future attacks. He presented a drone strike, surgically precise, a single missile obliterating Khalil and his... No risk of capture, no possibility of a rescue attempt. The logic was undeniable. Khalil was a terrorist, a mass murderer. Justice, in its crudest form, would be swift, but the counter-arguments were equally compelling. A trial, argued David, the lead legal counsel, a man who saw the world in shades of gray, would expose Hezbollah's involvement, cripple their operations. We could extract valuable intelligence, dismantle their networks. A trial was a long shot, dependent on the cooperation of other nations subject to political interference, but the rewards, the potential to weaken Hezbollah, to hold Iran accountable, were too significant to ignore. Aydin watched them argue, the pros and cons meticulously laid out, the tactical advantages weighed against the strategic imperative. The voices grew louder, emotions, for a moment, were allowed to surface. The discussion spiraled into a vortex of competing interests, each stakeholder fighting for their perspective. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the crushing pressure of the decision. He was the one who had to make it. He was the one who had to weigh the lives of his operatives against the potential for strategic gains, against the abstract concept of justice. His gaze drifted to the window, the Tel Aviv skyline, a distant blur against the overcast sky. He pictured Khalil a phantom in the shadows, finally brought into the light. He imagined the years of preparation, the meticulous planning, the relentless pursuit that had led them to this moment. What was it all for? Revenge, justice, or something more complex, something he hadn't yet fully grasped? The room fell silent as he rose, the scrape of his chair echoing in the tense atmosphere. He walked to the window, staring at the cityscape, taking in a breath that was thick with the weight of it all. He thought of his team, the men and women who had dedicated their lives to this mission, the operatives waiting in the shadows, their fates hanging in the balance. He turned back to the table, his face set in a look of grim determination. "Capture," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We capture him." The room reacted instantly, like a single body, a rush of movement, of murmurs, of disbelief. But the decision had been made, and now the operation would continue. The air in the surveillance van hung thick with the metallic temps of sweat and the stale scent of instant coffee. The silence punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of servers and the low, urgent whispers of the team. A half-a-tin container of falafel sat forgotten on the dash, its vibrant colors dulled by the harsh fluorescent glow of the monitors. Aitan Shalev, head of the division, ran a hand across his weary eyes, the ghost of Khalil's face a composite of altered features. A fleeting glimpses captured by distant cameras burned into his retinas. He knew the moment of capture, the brief, brutal ambush, could be days, weeks, or even months away, but the weight of anticipation, the knowledge of the precise, impending danger was a constant companion. The primary focus was the market, the dusty, bustling marketplace, a cacophony of Arabic chat. The aroma of spices mingling with the scent of fresh bread seemed an unlikely hunting ground. But it was here, amongst the throng of shoppers and vendors, that Khalil appeared weekly, a ghost in the vibrant tapestry of Lebanese life. He purchased groceries, supplies, always paying in cash, never lingering, his gaze sweeping the surroundings with a practiced vigilance. Today, however, Shalev was observing through the eyes of the team. He focused on the tactical screens, visualizing the surveillance team's positions, operatives disguised as street vendors, their faces etched with the bland neutrality of routine, monitored Khalil's every movement. Hidden cameras, concealed within storefronts and disguised as streetlights. captured his image, feeding data into the analytical algorithms that were constantly scrutinizing his gait, his posture, his The software, fed by the constant stream of data, was a patient, tireless hunter, sifting through the noise to find any flicker of weakness, any deviation from his meticulously crafted persona. Shalev leaned forward, squinting at the feed from the bakery, watching Khalil's reflection in the glass as he selected a loaf of bread. The man's movements were economical, efficient. He showed no sign of recognition, no hesitation, no hint of the storm that was about to break upon him. Each detail was catalogued, each movement assessed for its meaning. The team, too, understood the stakes. A single misstep, a moment of inattention, could unravel everything, jeopardizing years of painstaking work and potentially costing lives. The man's new face, surgically altered, was still etched with the memory of the past. The eyes, shadowed by years of secrecy, retained an intelligence that no amount of cosmetic surgery could mask. He moved with the guarded grace of a predator, his senses constantly attuned to the possibility of danger, his past life a chain attached to his ankle. He was a phantom, and they were the only ones who knew the secrets of his reality. The anticipation clawed at Shalev, the pressure of the impending operation compressing in his chest. His world, and the world of his team, hinged on that discipline. Each operative knew their role. Each understood the consequence of failure. His mind raced, replaying every contingency, every detail. He knew that the hunt, the chase, could end at any moment, and that he needed to be ready for the moment to come. But now it was the watching, the endless, unwavering, patient watch. The call came just as Aitina was finishing his second coffee of the morning, the harsh caffeine necessary counterpoint to the endless parade of data that filled his waking hours. The asterisk had seen it, a flicker, a momentary lapse in the iron discipline that had defined Khalil's decade-long ghost existence. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the armor, and it was all they needed. Aitan leaned back in his chair, the worn leather creaking beneath him. He closed his eyes, replaying the surveillance feed in his mind. The grainy image of Khalil, a phantom in the fluorescent glare of a Beirut pharmacy, the subtle tilt of his head as he glanced at a newspaper stand, the almost imperceptible hesitation before turning a corner. It was a pattern, a routine, a predictable rhythm that had become the target's sanctuary. But today, the rhythm had faltered. Khalil, the architect of so much death, was deviating. The lead analyst, a woman named Sarah with eyes as sharp as razors and a voice that never betrayed emotion, laid out the details. Khalil's weekly visit to the market, a meticulously planned excursion for supplies, had been scheduled for tomorrow, but based on intercepted communications, he was now expected to visit a specific, and usually unattended, mosque. Intelligence suggested a clandestine meeting was arranged by his handler. This meant the target's movements were now dictated by someone other than his own routine. This shift was a window, and the potential for a capture, a clean capture, was significant. "He's receiving instructions," Sarah stated matter-of-factly, her voice barely a whisper above the worry of the server room. "We can predict, with a high degree of confidence, that the mosque is a relay point for his next assignment." Aitan's mind raced. This was the opening they'd been waiting for, the anomaly that could break the long, drawn-out stalemate. Years of patient surveillance, of tracking every digital footprint, every intercepted word, every shadow he cast, had come down to this. This was their opportunity to take him out of the Hezbollah-controlled zone, away from the immediate threat of retaliation, to bring him to justice, or, at least, to gather information. The pressure of the moment was a physical weight, settling in his chest. He swiveled in his chair, gazing out the window at the Tel Aviv skyline, the sun glinting off the Mediterranean in the distance. He felt the phantom ache in his temples, the familiar throb that came with weeks of strained concentration. His team had been working non-stop, sifting through mountains of data, chasing whispers, building profiles, waiting for this. He'd seen the toll it had taken, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the constant tension. A misstep now could erase everything. He thought of the weight of the EMEA bombing, the 85 lives extinguished in an instant. He thought of the relentless grief of the families, the desperate search for closure that had consumed them. The world saw him as a master of death. He was a symbol of resistance, an emblem of Hezbollah's reach. But he was also a man, a mortal, and that made him vulnerable. Eitan's gaze narrowed. He pushed aside the weight of the moral dilemma that had plagued him for years. This was about more than just retribution. This was about the relentless pursuit of justice, about the unwavering dedication to their mission. This was about the fundamental belief that no one, no matter how clever or how ruthless, could truly escape the long arm of the law. "Prepare the operation," Eitan said finally, his voice steady. "We move on this. Coordinate with all teams. I want a clean extraction with minimal risk. But above all, I want him." The weight of the decision settled on Eitan Shalev's shoulders, a physical ache that mirrored the moral and strategic complexities swirling within him. He'd seen 1,000 faces of death, had authored the fates of countless men and women. But this was different. This was the culmination of a decade-long hunt, a relentless pursuit of a ghost who'd brought terror to the streets of Buenos Aires and, in doing so, had etched himself into the very fabric of Israel's enemies. A quick, clean shot from a drone. A precision strike, it would have been simpler, cleaner, the problem solved with the cold efficiency of a well-aimed bullet. But the debate, the agonizing weighing of options, had led them here. Capture, justice, not just vengeance. But it was also a gamble, a descent into the shadowy world of risk and consequence, where the only guarantee was uncertainty. Eitan sat in his Spartan office, the sterile air conditioning a stark contrast to the humid afternoon clinging to the city outside. Sunlight sliced through the blinds, painting stripes across his desk, illuminating the meticulous files, the maps dotted with pins, the photographs of Imad Khalil. Younger then, older, his face a shifting canvas of disguise and deception. He ran a hand through his close-cropped gray hair, the friction a small comfort against the mounting pressure. The arguments for capture had been compelling. The intelligence dividend, the possibility of dismantling Hezbollah's operational infrastructure, the chance to expose Iran's involvement in the Amiya bombing, the political capital of bringing a terrorist to trial. Each point hammered at him, echoing in the quiet room. He stared at the photograph of the warehouse, a nondescript brick building near the Beirut port, a place where shipping containers were loaded and unloaded, where shadows held secrets, a perfect killing ground, and now their chosen stage. He knew every inch of that warehouse, every angle, every blind spot, had memorized the deployment plan with the precision of a surgeon. The operative's whispers during the briefing still echoed in his mind. "Precision is key, sir. We're aiming for a clean extraction, minimal engagement. He'll be sedated before he realizes what's happening." Eitan picked up his pen and stared at the dotted line on the authorization form. He traced the smooth curve of his signature, his name, his responsibility. It was a commitment, a promise to the men and women who would walk into danger. His hand didn't shake. Years of training, of living in the shadow world, had hardened him. But a shadow of doubt, a chill, seeped through the veneer of his professional armor. The plan was flawless. The teams were the best. But the enemy was Imad Khalil, a master of deception, a ghost who'd vanished into thin air. He knew Khalil wouldn't make any mistakes, but the system that was deployed by the Mossad was relentless. He thought of the faces of the victims, the 85 souls lost in the dust of the Amiya bombing. Each life, a universe snuffed out in an instant of unimaginable violence. His decision was not only to take a life, but also was driven to bring the perpetrator to justice. Justice would require a lot more than just a quick execution. With a sigh, he slid the form across the desk, the signature crisp and confident. Operation Architect was a go. The wheels were in motion. The hunt was ending. The next chapter was about to begin. The future was unwritten, but one thing was certain. The world of darkness was about to shift. Its balance changed by the capture of a single man. The air in the sterile planning room, thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending doom, felt heavy on Eitan Shalev's chest as he stared at the map. The capture, the actual taking of Imad Khalil, was only hours away, and the weight of it, the potential for catastrophic failure, pressed down on him. Every thread of their decade-long hunt had led to this point, and every possibility, every contingency had been debated, argued, and rehearsed until the scenarios were etched into their very bones. The briefing for Operation Architect, a detailed tapestry of precision and luck, began. A holographic projection of the warehouse in the industrial district of Beirut shimmered into existence. Eitan circled the structure with a stylus, his gaze sweeping over the simulated floor plan. "The target will be arriving at approximately 1430 hours," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He'd learned long ago that detachment was a necessary shield in this business. "He will believe he's meeting with a handler from Hezbollah." The message, crafted with the utmost care, promises urgent security concerns. He trusts the source. He trusts the code. The lead operative, a veteran of countless missions, a man known only as David, stepped forward. "Our operatives are in place. Surveillance is locked. The warehouse has been prepped. There is a single entrance and one main point of engagement. We will be using stun grenades. No shots fired. Our primary objective is to take the target alive, extract him, and leave no trace." Aiton nodded, his eyes scanning the faces of the team, the extraction specialists, the medical personnel, the linguists, the explosive experts, all men and women who lived and breathed in the shadows, their lives defined by their ability to operate unseen. David reviewed the extraction route. David pointed to another holographic display showing the planned exit strategy. "The target will be loaded into a modified van, prepped for a rapid departure. We have secured a secondary extraction point near the coast, where a waiting vessel will expedite his exfiltration." The briefing continued, an exhaustive breakdown of every conceivable threat, every possible complication. The threat of Hezbollah retaliation, the potential for civilian casualties, the ever-present danger of discovery by Lebanese authorities. Each of these nightmares was discussed, a plan within a plan carefully constructed to mitigate the inherent risks. Aiton, however, knew the plan was nothing more than a carefully constructed framework, a structure that could shatter into 1,000 pieces with a single misstep. The operatives discussed the use of non-lethal weapons, ensuring that Khalil was subdued quickly and efficiently. The importance of compartmentalization was again reiterated, a critical component of their Then there was the plan to ensure that every aspect of the mission was in place, down to every specific detail. As the briefing drew to a close, Aiton addressed the team, his gaze locking with each operative. The risks, the importance of this mission. I want you to be absolutely certain of every aspect of your role. Make no mistakes. And remember," he added, his voice dropping, "the man we are hunting is a ghost, a master of deception. Do not underestimate him. Not for a moment." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, a reminder of the gravity of the operation. The success of Operation Architect, its potential to dismantle a dangerous network and bring a killer to justice, hinged on the skill and discipline of these men and women. Then Aiton nodded. "Godspeed." The team dispersed, their faces grim, their movements precise. Each of them, Aiton knew, would be consumed by the weight of their respective roles. Their focus narrowed to the single, all-consuming task at hand, the capture of Imad Falay's Khalil. The hunt, after a decade of patient pursuit, was about to enter its final, perilous act. The stale air in the warehouse held the metallic temps of old machinery and the faint, lingering scent of diesel, but for Aiton, it was a familiar scent, the scent of victory, and the even more crucial aroma of a plan taking shape. He wasn't physically present, of course. His command center, a war room of screens and hushed whispers, was miles away, but his mind's eye was here, in this grimy industrial district near the Beirut port, in the heart of the meticulous setup. He watched the feeds, each camera a vigilant eye, each operative a tightly wound spring, waiting for the calculated moment. The warehouse itself was a study in calculated anonymity. It was a shell, a hollowed-out concrete rectangle that had, just weeks prior, been a storage facility for shipping containers. Now, it was a stage meticulously prepared for play with stakes immeasurably high. Operatives, disguised as construction workers, had spent days reinforcing the interior, strategically placing cameras and reinforcing the weak points. Every detail was accounted for. The direction of the sunlight, the angles of the cameras, the blind spots that needed to be covered. They had rehearsed the operation countless times, each movement choreographed, each operative knowing his role down to the millisecond. Outside, the street hummed with the indifferent rhythm of the city. Trucks rumbled past. Horns blared, the sounds of everyday life masking the silent tension that gripped the Mossad team. Aiton could almost feel the collective breath held by his people, the meticulous preparation transforming the city from chaos to a structured landscape. In the minds of the Mossad operatives, The warehouse wasn't just a warehouse. It was a carefully constructed cage, and the prey was about to walk into its embrace. The surveillance teams, positioned in unmarked vans and nondescript buildings, were the eyes of the operation. They monitored the approach to the warehouse. Each operative was a master of his craft, trained in the art of blending in, of being invisible, capable of disappearing into the crowd as quickly as they appeared. They were the sentinels, the silent guardians who would relay the vital information. The warehouse's interior was a study in deceptive emptiness. The only furniture was a single metal table. A strategically placed support beam, reinforced with high-grade steel, was positioned to create a natural choke point. The lighting was deliberately poor, casting long shadows and obscuring potential escape routes. The air hung thick with anticipation, each second stretched like an elastic band, ready to snap at the touch of Khalil. He thought of the man they sought, a ghost who had haunted them for a decade. He knew Khalil was likely methodical, cautious. He had spent years evading them, mastering the art of disappearance. But he had also grown complacent. Aiton said he had become comfortable in his anonymity, perhaps even arrogant. It was that hubris, that small window of predictability, that they were exploiting. Aiton leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his tired eyes. He knew that the success of the mission hinged on meticulous preparation and a perfect execution, but it also demanded an element of luck. No plan was foolproof. There were always variables that couldn't be accounted for, wildcards that could shatter everything. He had faith in his team, in their training, in their dedication, but he also understood that in the world of intelligence, victory was never guaranteed. He took a deep breath, the tension building within him, the air thick with anticipation. The moment of truth was approaching. The trap was set. Now, they waited for the prey to take the bait. The world narrowed to a pinprick, a flash of white-hot pain, and then oblivion. Aiton watched, his pulse a steady drum against the sterile silence of the command center. The warehouse in Beirut flickering across a dozen screens. It was a symphony of precision, each movement calculated, each second a victory against the odds. The warehouse air hung thick and stale, a cloying blend of dust motes dancing in the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. The smell of old oil and forgotten machinery clung to everything. Ahmad Khalil, or rather, the man who had become Ahmad Khalil, moved with the quiet grace of a predator, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. He was a phantom, a ghost they had chased for a decade, and now he was here, in the heart of their trap. He walked slowly, testing, observing, the air around him thick with the weight of years spent eluding capture. Aiton held his breath, acutely aware of the fragility of the moment. The delicate balance of the operation poised on the precipice of success or failure. He'd studied Khalil's movements, his meticulous routines, his awareness of the constant threat. This man was a master of his craft, a ghost in the machine of the modern world. Every detail of the operation, from the placement of the cameras to the timing of the extraction, had been honed to perfection. But even the best laid plans could unravel in an instant. On the screens, Khalil reached the designated meeting point, a single metal table in the center of the cavernous space. His hand, Aiton noticed, drifted toward his waist toward the concealed weapon they knew he carried. The seconds stretched, each one an eternity, a test of will. Then, the signal. The lead operative, his face obscured by a balaclava, emerged from the shadows. The warehouse exploded in controlled chaos. Stun grenades, their blinding flash momentarily painting the room in an unbearable white, the air filled with a high-pitched whine that clawed at Aiton's ears. He could almost feel the concussive force of the stun grenades, see Khalil's body jerk as the force of the attack, so precisely timed, knocked him down. Before the echoes of the flash subsided, the team moved with a brutal, coordinated efficiency. The operatives, trained in the art of speed and silence, descended upon their target, their movements fluid and practiced. They knew the layout of the warehouse, the angles, the blind spots. They had rehearsed this moment countless times. Khalil struggled, a primal scream lost in the sudden surge of violence. They swarmed him, immobilizing him, their hands a blur as they worked with practiced precision. The entire operation lasted less than 15 seconds. Aiton let out the breath he'd been holding, a silent prayer of gratitude and relief. The mission was going exactly as planned. The extraction team, their faces impassive, worked with clinical precision, securing Khalil. His eyes, dazed and unfocused, stared up at the ceiling, the light reflecting in their depths. The warehouse, once a stage for a deadly katana mouse game, was now a scene of stark, decisive victory. From the surveillance feeds, Aiton watched the extraction team lift the incapacitated Khalil. He was bound, gagged, and secured. The van's rear doors were thrown open, and they loaded the target. The team moved swiftly, disappearing back into the shadows they'd emerged from, leaving no trace of their presence. Aiton's attention now shifted, following the van as it sped away, its route meticulously planned and vetted, every turn accounted for. The next phase was extraction, escape, and silence. But for now, the ghost had been caught, and a chapter in the long, dark history of intelligence had been written. The world narrowed to the scope of a camera lens, and the rhythmic thud of Aiton, Essie heart in his ears as he watched the grainy feed from the warehouse. A breath caught in his throat as the seconds stretched, a lifetime compacted into the cold, sterile glow of the control room screens. Khalil was entering the warehouse. The air in the surveillance van was thick with a nervous tension, a cocktail of adrenaline, and the quiet hum of sophisticated technology. Outside the warehouse, an unremarkable concrete box belied the intricate ballet about to unfold within. Inside, the space was dimly lit, the fluorescent tubes casting long, skeletal shadows across dusty crates and abandoned machinery. Khalil moved with the practiced wariness of a man accustomed to shadows. He didn't rush. He didn't linger. His hand, Aiton noted with a grim satisfaction, was close to his waist, a tell that confirmed the intel. A concealed weapon. Aiton's gaze flickered to the clock on the wall, the seconds ticking away with a cruel precision. Each operative involved knew their role, their movements rehearsed until they were muscle memory. There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. The operation hinged on timing, on split-second decisions that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. He replayed the plan in his mind, the routes of entry, the positioning of the operatives, the pre-arranged signals. Everything was in place. Now it was down to the execution. Khalil reached the center of the warehouse, his eyes scanning the empty space. Then a voice crackled over the comms, the pre-arranged signal given. Aiton leaned forward, every muscle taut, as two figures emerged from their hiding places, their weapons trained on their target. The silence inside the warehouse shattered as the operatives swiftly moved in for the capture. In a flash of practiced efficiency, the air filled with the crackle of a taser. Khalil's body went limp, his face contorted in a mask of surprise and pain. The whole thing lasted no more than 10 seconds. It was over before it began. Aiton exhaled, a long, shaky breath that released some of the tension. The screen showed the operatives moving with practiced precision, quickly securing Khalil. They moved with purpose, aware of every second ticking by. The extraction team moved into position, and the van door swung open. Within minutes, the captured man was loaded into the waiting vehicle, the warehouse once again swallowed by shadows. The extraction team was already moving the vehicle towards the pre-planned escape route, a maze of backstreets designed to evade any potential pursuit. Aiton watched the feed with a sense of relief, but he knew the operation was far from over. This was the moment of success, the culmination of a decade of relentless pursuit. Now came the interrogation. The long process of unraveling the secrets of a man who had mastered the art of disappearance. He glanced again at the clock. The hunt was far from over. It was time for Phase 2. The warehouse air tasted of dust and stale oil, a metallic temps clinging to the sudden, disorienting quiet that followed the flashbang. One moment, I'm at Falaise. Khalil had been a man, the architect, the phantom. The next, he was a collection of limbs, twitching on the cold concrete. 10 years, a lifetime of shadows, all distilled into this instant. Aiton Shalev, head of the division, watched the live feed from the van. The image grainy and distorted, but the details were as sharp as the chill that had settled in his bones. He'd spent a decade haunted by this ghost, poring over every detail of Khalil's life, learning his methods, anticipating his moves. Now, here he was. It was a victory, undeniably. But the taste in Aiton's mouth was a bitter one. He felt a sliver of the weight that Khalil must have been carrying for the past decade and the responsibility of the choices that had brought them to this point. The team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 operatives, their faces obscured by balaclavas, were already on Khalil, securing his arms with zip ties. Another was injecting a sedative, his movements precise and economical. Khalil, despite the disorientation, fought with a desperate, animalistic energy, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Aiton could almost hear his thoughts. The sudden betrayal, the disbelief, the fury. It was a flicker, a ghost of the man they had hunted for so long. The team lifted Khalil onto a stretcher, and the image lurched as they carried him towards the waiting van. Aiton could see the warehouse walls, the flickering fluorescent lights, the dust motes dancing in the weak beams. Every detail was etched in his mind, the culmination of years of tireless work, endless frustration, and the relentless pursuit of a ghost. The world narrowed to the faces of the operatives, the contorted features of their prey. He could almost feel the thump of Khalil's pulse against his own skin, the adrenaline flooding his system. He pictured the van, a nondescript commercial vehicle, already pulling away from the warehouse. The extraction. It was the crucial moment. He saw the team, who had been training for this moment, had it all planned. He saw Khalil's eyes, and in them a flicker of fear. And as he watched, he could almost feel the ground shift beneath him, the tension in the air. Time seemed to slow. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Aiton thought of all the dead that had led to this moment. All the sacrifices, all the betrayals, all the lives touched and ruined by Khalil's actions. The ghosts of the past swirled around him, a chilling reminder of the stakes. This was a battle between darkness and light, and the burden of that reality rested heavily upon his shoulders. The extraction was flawless, the van disappearing into the maze of industrial streets. The signal from the warehouse was cut, and the feed flickered to black. The echo of the brief, brutal encounter lingered in the air. The hunt was over, but the work had just begun. The interrogation, the trial, the long years of confinement, these were the next chapters in a story that had cost so much and would continue to have ripple effects in the years to come. Aiton leaned back in his chair, the image of Khalil, captured, held firm in his mind. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond the cold logic of intelligence, that the shadows never truly faded. The past, as always, would continue to find the present. The silence in the aftermath was the loudest sound Aiton Shalev had ever heard, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos he'd witnessed on the comes just minutes before. Asterisk, he was gone. Asterisk. Just like that, the ghost of Buenos Aires, the man who'd haunted their files for a decade, was no longer a phantom. The warehouse, the extraction point, the boat, all check. The operation, executed with the cold precision of a surgeon, was complete. But the victory felt hollow. It was a victory measured not in jubilation, but in the grim reality that the game had shifted, not ended. Aiton, still seated in the command center, could taste the metallic temps of adrenaline on his tongue, the residual thrum of tension fading into a quiet exhaustion. The room, usually buzzing with the frantic energy of a mission in progress, was now subdued. The screens, moments ago alive with live feeds, now displayed static data in the sterile glow of after-action reports. The air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and stale expectations, hung heavy with the weight of what had been accomplished and what was yet to come. The initial reports trickled in. Khalil was secured, sedated, and en route to the extraction point. The speed, the efficiency was almost unnerving. Every contingency, every variable had been accounted for. Yet, a knot of unease twisted in Aiton's gut. The success of the capture was undeniable, but the true test lay ahead. He swiveled in his chair, gazing out at the faces of his team, the men and women who had dedicated years to this single, elusive target. Their expressions were a mix of relief, exhaustion, and a quiet professional satisfaction. They had played their roles perfectly, moving like cogs in a finely tuned machine, but Aiton knew the victory wouldn't last. Hezbollah would know, and the inevitable fallout was already beginning. The political machinations, the international implications, the renewed focus on their methods and their successes. He knew the pressure on them would be immense. The first tangible consequences were already hitting the coms. Hezbollah's channels crackled with frantic activity. Whispers turned to shouts, and then to a furious, coordinated search. Contingency plans were being enacted, safe houses emptied, and assets pulled back from the streets. This was just the beginning. The world would soon explode into a frenzy of diplomatic posturing, condemnations, and calls for restraint. The Mossad would be scrutinized, their every action dissected. This capture, a triumph of relentless pursuit, was also a declaration of war, a constant reminder of the unseen battle being waged in the shadows. He needed to focus on the next stage, the interrogation. The information they could extract from Khalil was of paramount importance. It would reveal Hezbollah's current capabilities, their future operations, and the vulnerabilities in their network. It would provide actionable intelligence, allowing them to disrupt their activities and preempt future attacks. But that would also be an agonizing gamble. Khalil was a master of his craft, trained to withstand the most brutal pressures. The interrogation team would face their greatest challenge yet, a battle of wills that could last for months. The game had just changed. It hadn't ended. The endless hunt for the enemies of Israel, the unseen war, continued. The air in the secure interrogation room hung thick with the metallic temps of fear and the sterile scent of antiseptic. Despite a decade spent eluding capture, it was here, in this soundproofed cell, that Ahmad Falez Khalil finally crumbled, his defiance dissolving into a torrent of information. Aitan Shalev, watching the grainy video feed from Tel Aviv, felt a grim satisfaction mixed with a weary empathy. He knew the cost of this victory, the relentless pressure applied to a man who had dedicated his life to disappearing. The room itself was Spartan. A steel table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and a single, unblinking camera eye. The walls were painted a nondescript gray designed to minimize distraction and maximize the sense of confinement. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with Khalil's every movement. The interrogators, handpicked for their expertise in psychological manipulation, were a study in calm efficiency. They were the architects of this moment, the ones who had patiently chipped away at Khalil's resolve. Aitan focused on the subtle cues, the fleeting flicker of his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He'd seen the initial defiance in Khalil, the arrogant stillness that masked a deep well of fear, that had quickly given way to a carefully constructed mask of cooperation, an attempt to control the narrative. But now, after weeks of relentless questioning, the facade was crumbling. The floodgates had opened. He saw the reports filtering in, the words meticulously typed, outlining the intricate web of Hezbollah's operations. Khalil was a master of his craft, and now he was meticulously sharing the secrets of his intricate and long game. He revealed the locations of hidden arms caches, the identities of key operatives, the intricacies of the EMEA bombing, down to the precise placement of the explosives. The air thrummed with a different energy now. Not fear, but a sense of revelation. The interrogation was a dance, a delicate balance of pressure and release. The interrogators were masters of the art, pushing Khalil to the brink, then offering a lifeline, a glimmer of hope that cooperation would ease his burden. Aitan knew the pressure was unrelenting. Sleep deprivation, the constant barrage of questions, the unyielding reminders of his impending fate, these were the tools used to break even the most hardened individuals. Khalil's own words, the very architecture of his life, were now being used against him. He thought of the weight of the past decade, the endless nights, the relentless pursuit, the failures, and the near misses. It all culminated in this room, in this moment. The files, the surveillance, the relentless analysis, they have all led to this very point. And now the information was beginning to flow, a torrent that threatened to overwhelm even the most seasoned analyst. He thought of the intelligence that was of use for them. Each piece of information was meticulously verified, cross-referenced with existing intelligence, and then channeled through the vast network of the Mossad. It was a treasure trove of actionable intelligence, a devastating blow to Hezbollah's operations. Aitan knew that the immediate impact would be significant. As he continued to observe, Aitan understood that Khalil's story was a somber reminder of a world where secrets were temporary, and even the most skilled could be undone. The files, the surveillance, the relentless analysis, they have all led to this very point. And now the information was beginning to flow, a torrent that threatened to overwhelm even the most seasoned analyst. Aitan leaned back in his chair, the harsh fluorescent lights of the control room reflecting in his tired eyes as a picture of Ahmad Falez, Khalil's face, now devoid of the defiance that had marked it in the surveillance photos, stared back at him. But he also knew that the information was perishable. Khalil, now stripped of his secrets, was a broken man, a ghost of the architect who had once vanished so completely. The weight of 10 years of relentless pursuit, of sleepless nights spent poring over intercepted communications and grainy photographs, suddenly felt heavier, the culmination of a decade of work now distilled into a single, defeated image. The success of the operation was undeniable, a triumph of patience and meticulous planning, but a hollow victory nonetheless. The sterile environment of the secure facility hummed with a low thrum of activity. Analysts, their faces illuminated by the green glow of computer screens, were already sifting through the torrent of information pouring in from the interrogation, cross-referencing it with existing intelligence, and assessing the potential damage control efforts Hezbollah would undertake. The air itself seemed thick with anticipation, the palpable tension of a successful operation that had nevertheless left a lingering residue of unease. Eitan closed his eyes briefly, imagining the scene that had transpired in the warehouse, the brutal efficiency of the takedown, the sudden end to the ghost's decade-long evasion. A chill ran down his spine. The initial reports from the interrogators were promising, filled with details of Hezbollah's internal structure, operational networks, and future attack plans. Khalil, broken and isolated, had begun to unravel, revealing the intricate web of deception he had woven for so long. The information was a treasure trove, a tactical advantage that could be used to disrupt operations and potentially prevent future attacks. Eitan understood, however, that this intelligence, no matter how valuable, was a fleeting gift. Hezbollah, he knew, would be swift in adapting, reevaluating the strategies and procedures, knowing that their opponent would capitalize on every flaw that Khalil shared. He reached for the Khalil dossier, the heavy, oversized binder that held the sum total of their efforts. He flipped through the pages, the glossy photographs, and detailed schematics, a testament to the relentless, almost obsessive pursuit that had defined the past decade. Every intercepted communication, every surveillance photo, every piece of circumstantial evidence had been meticulously documented. The system, Eitan thought, was a merciless machine, grinding away at the truth, relentlessly pursuing the shadows until they were brought into the light. He stared at the face of Khalil again, searching for any trace of the man who had orchestrated the EMEA bombing, a man who had vanished for a decade. All he saw was weariness and resignation, the look of a man who knew he had been beaten, not by a single mistake, but by an unyielding system. He could feel the ache in his shoulders and the dryness of his throat, the effects of the non-stop planning and implementation of the operation, which took months to assemble. He picked up his pen and carefully, deliberately wrote across the final page, Operation Architect complete. Then he closed the dossier. He knew that the task was never truly finished. The machinery of intelligence, the endless cycle of collection, analysis, and pursuit would continue. There were other files, other names, other shadows that needed to be illuminated. The hunt never ended. The system never slept. The next target was always out there, waiting. Eitan Shalev watched the final file close, a crisp, metallic snap echoing in the sterile silence of his office. The sound, a stark contrast to the deafening explosion that once tore through the heart of Buenos Aires for 10 years. The dossier had been a living entity, its pages crammed with grainy surveillance photos, intercepted communications, and the relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of a ghost. Now Ahmed Falez Khalil was no longer a name that haunted late nights, no longer a phantom flitting through the shadows. He was a prisoner. Eitan leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking slightly. The victory was a cold one. There was no exhilaration, only a profound weariness that settled in his bones. The capture of Khalil was a testament to the power of the machine, the relentless, unforgiving engine of intelligence. It was a victory earned not through brilliance or daring, but through the patient accumulation of data, the meticulous weaving of a web that eventually snared its prey. He picked up a pen, twirling it between his fingers. The air in the office was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee, a scent that had become synonymous with his life. Sunlight, struggling to penetrate the heavily tinted windows, cast long, distorted shadows across the room, mimicking the long shadows that had fallen across Khalil's life. He felt it the creeping, insidious understanding that the cost of this victory was measured not only in the tireless dedication of his team, but also in the subtle erosion of something within himself, something that resembled faith, or perhaps hope. The Khalil file was complete, sealed, and archived. He had seen hundreds of such files in his career. The end of the hunt always felt like the end of something personal, even when it wasn't. But this felt different. This was a testament to the fact that the hunt never truly ends. Even with Khalil secured in a cell, the machine kept running. The data streams continued to flow. The algorithms never slept. He considered the faces of his team, etched with the strain of years spent chasing a shadow. He thought of the informants, the double agents, the nameless individuals who had risked everything, their lives forever altered by their association with the Mossad. He knew the price they paid, the constant fear, the unwavering vigilance, the weight of secrets they carried. Aitan ran a hand through his thinning hair. He knew that even as this chapter closed, another one had already begun, somewhere in some darkened corner of the world. Another individual, deemed a threat, was meticulously crafting a new identity, a new life, a new escape. Another name was being added to the endless lists. Another dossier opened. Another relentless pursuit launched. He knew that the real lesson, the true chilling reality of the work they did, wasn't the capture of Khalil. It was the understanding that they, too, were bound by the machine, trapped within its relentless gears. The system never rested. The hunt never ceased. He was just a cog in the machine. He had seen the truth, and there was no escape. He looked down at the Khalil file one last time before dropping it in a secure compartment in his desk, now a heavy symbol of a job well done.